It's funny because I always got the impression with you that like you were legitimate.
That's what I wanted, man. You made 23-year-old me, 22-year-old me the happiest motherfucker on the planet right now when you just said that.
Welcome to Growing Up Christian. I'm Casey.
And I'm Sam.
And we're happy to talk to you. So this is a podcast that Sam and I have been talking about doing for quite a while now. To give you the long and short of it, we grew up in very conservative Christian households in the early 2000s. And some of the things that we, over time, thought were kind of strange about the environments that we grew up in, the churches that we went to, we came to realize that they're not so strange. They're pretty typical, and a lot of people had very similar sorts of experiences as us, and it's had a lasting impression on them. And our goal with this podcast is to talk about those things, to laugh at some of the funny stuff that we went through, to laugh at some of the messed up stuff that we heard and went through, and to talk to some really interesting people and hear how it's affected their lives. Ultimately, your teenage years especially forge your worldview, right? It's you're creating the filter through which you view life for basically the rest of your existence, and it's just a strange lens that growing up in that environment made for us.
Yeah, I think at this point in our lives as two people in our early 30s who had spent the first more than 2 decades in steeped in conservative evangelicalism. That was our circle. That was our church, our school, our college. We were around it. And despite the way that, some people may or may have acted, the types of trouble some of our peers may have gotten into as the rebellious kids or whatever, they were all people who kind of essentially believed the same things we did. It was very much a bubble. And I think as we moved on from college, and that's when you kind of see, even in college, but we saw a lot of people the same types of people that we'd grown up with, move in many, many different places. And I think despite where every single one of us ended up, there's this common thread that goes through all of us where, I could meet somebody brand new who grew up the way I did. And instantly you have hours and hours of stuff to talk about. You could drink a lot of beers together and tell a lot of fun stories. And it feels like there's almost a kinship. And that to me is what, through talking with you, it's like, this is the kind of things that are interesting to us. It has such a deep impact on your lives and to see where people end up and to be able to have the conversations about it and the way it impacted you or didn't, or how you changed or didn't. That's very interesting to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you are an ex-Awana kid, if you grew up in a church school or Christian school, whatever you called it,
yeah,
this is the podcast for you. We've got so many ideas for topics to flesh out on here. I think it's going to be a blast.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little background, Sam and I met in college. We're both Liberty University alumni.
Yep.
Which means we got the foremost Christian education,
the best
available.
Oh yeah, it doesn't get better than that.
Our founder and his son, fantastic people. You may have seen them in some news reports lately about infidelity and cuckolding. Don't worry about it. Now, I just feel like I should say right from the beginning that this is not a Christian podcast.
Yeah, let's get that out of the way.
You know, if you are still in that conservative realm, just be aware that there's going to be mature subject matter and language, and you're just going to have to deal with it. We're not going to filter ourselves.
Yeah. It might get an NSFW tag or whatever.
All right. So with that, we thought that this first episode might be a great time to just introduce ourselves a little bit and talk about who we are and how we came to be this way. And so, Sam, good a place to start as any. Where did you grow up?
All right. So I grew up in New England. I'm from Massachusetts. And by from Massachusetts, I mean I still live in Massachusetts. I have never lived anywhere else. I've had it's pretty simple. You know, I don't have any great cool stories about moving around or this or that, but I always kind of view my like childhood in like two partitions. Wait, I don't know if as a partition, whatever. I don't know how you're supposed to say that, but it's like
two pieces,
two segments. I got two segments of my life where it's like that. It's like from my earliest memory until about 12, and then from 12 until I graduated high school. I grew up, I was born on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which is like, if you look at a map and you're looking at Massachusetts, that arm that sticks out, like it was kind of in the center of that. And nothing particularly notable about it.
Family neighborhood or something, right?
Say that again.
It's like some Kennedy family neighborhood or something.
Oh yeah. That's actually pretty correct. But it was really nothing notable about it. Other than that's where I grew up. I was homeschooled. My parents at that point, like for the most part of my time on the Cape, we had a home church, and I was almost exclusively surrounded by the same 3, 4, 5, give or take, families for the first 11 or 12 years of my life. And then at some point, my parents decided to move to central Massachusetts, out by, I guess, for anyone that, if it even matters, out by Worcester. It's a big city in Massachusetts, and it's west of Boston. And that's where I did high school. You know, I did youth group, church, and that was pretty much it. I was a big time church boy growing up. I did everything there. If there was anything to sign up for that had to do with church, I was there. Missions trips, work projects, helping old people rake their lawns, whatever it was. If it was related to getting out of my house and doing something at church, I was very much involved. Because I loved it. It was actually, it really mattered to me as a kid. I bought into it pretty heavily, and it was really an important aspect of my life. So I don't know. What about you, man? What was your shed some light on where you're from?
So I was born in Colorado, but while I was still pretty young, we moved to Georgia. I grew up, my younger years in Georgia, very much so, yeah. And same sort of thing, like Southern Baptist Church, there every time the doors are open, basically. My family was like the Sunday morning, Wednesday crowd. We didn't do Sunday evenings too much.
Ooh.
So
I didn't even know about Sunday evenings until I moved to the South. That is not a northern thing. You don't see that in New England.
The Sunday evening crowd at church is kind of like the 1 a.m. crowd at Walmart. Like, you don't want to be there.
Unless you're Catholic. Catholic's big in New England, and they have mass all the time.
It's just so much fun. But yeah, so I was in Georgia until I was in 4th grade. Halfway through 4th grade, we moved to Michigan. My parents started a business in Michigan, and we kind of took like a major step back in terms of our livelihood and things like that. But it was all done under the assumption that someday we're going to be, independent business owners and things are going to be great, which it did. It did eventually get there. But from that point on, I lived in Michigan. Fifth grade through 12th, I went to Christian school. Very Christian school.
How many kids were in this Christian school?
It depended on the year. At the most, it was like 80 some. Wow. K through 12. And at the least,
something K through 12.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
A lot of dating options, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point.
I mean, luckily, if you're Christian, it's fine if the person's like 5 or 6 years younger than you. It's no, I'm just kidding.
I think we can find some biblical precedent for that.
I don't want to set the wrong idea that that's what our families were into or thought was
3,
okay.
4, 40, whatever. But at the most it was like 80 some. At the least, which I think my senior year was the smallest it ever got, we had less than 50 kids.
Wow.
It was
I didn't
small.
even have a class, dude. That's insane.
I think there were certain, some grades on certain years where they didn't even have any students in that grade, but it was very much like it was almost like homeschooling in a group. Like everybody had a little cubicle. They worked on their own little books, and the teacher was there and if you needed them.
And they made $12,000 a year?
Most of them were not teachers, which I'm sure we'll get into at some point. But most of them were parents volunteering because they got a discount on their schooling for their kids.
I will not get paid, so I don't have to pay as much for my kid to go to this school that I'm not getting paid to teach at.
Right. I have to say Christian school because if I said I went to a private school, like that would give the total wrong impression. Yeah. This was not a premier academic environment. And we had like one teacher who was actually educated and had some background in like education.
Oh my God.
So I went there all the way through 12th grade. At some point, my parents like tried to pull the plug on it. And I was like, no, I need to go to Christian school.
Wow. Dude, they taught you well, though. That was a test and you passed. Good job.
Right. Yeah. Definitely protected my comfort zone there in those later years. I went to my first year of college. I went to Hillsdale University, which that probably doesn't mean anything to anyone except for, our Rush Limbaugh listeners.
50 people you went to high school with.
Right.
Or entire school with.
Yeah, it was like this tiny private school that was like quote unquote like very it was a premier college, which basically meant it was a small school for parents, rich parents to send their snotty kids to that they didn't want to drink and get into too much trouble.
Okay, that makes sense.
I hated it a lot, and I learned a lot about how smart I actually was. I thought I was pretty smart, but it's easy to stand out in a classroom of 6.
Dude, no, go ahead.
Oh yeah. From there, I transferred to Liberty, continue my Christian education. And that's where I met you.
Yeah, that is where we met. Dude, just jumping up to where I guess I'll bring us up through college for me. After I graduated high school, being homeschooled, I didn't really pay. I junior year, I did fine. Like, I assumed that I was doing everything right and that my curriculum was normal for the most part. And then like my senior year though, like I would wake up in the morning, go downstairs, check in with my mom, eat breakfast, and just be like, I'm going upstairs to do my work. And then I would nap for about 2 or 3 hours and do nothing. And then afterwards, for the most part, like I barely did anything. I slacked off my entire senior year. My mom, I'm surprised she didn't spend a little bit more time trying to follow up with what I had gotten done. And
she needed a break from you.
Yeah, probably. But honestly, dude, and we'll get, this will become apparent as we move on into later episodes, was like a good kid. Easy. Like, I mean, I had some teenage angst, but it was like out of all of my siblings, pretty much out of all my siblings, I was at least tied for the best as far as not giving your parents a bunch of shit in high school. And But so my first year of college was community college, and after my senior year of doing nothing, like my mom had this. The angriest my mom I really recall her ever being was with me was when she was going through all of my school books and everything was empty, like at the end of the year, and she was like, "How am I supposed to do transcripts for you?" Like she flipped out, and I'm like having a panic attack. I'm like, I'm gonna be the dumbest kid in college, like. There's absolutely no chance I'm going to succeed in life. So my first year at community college, week 1 in class, I realized that I was one of the smartest kids there. I was like, these kids are so dumb. I don't know how I didn't.
Opposite way of me.
Yeah.
Like it was a humbling experience for me. It emboldened you.
Yeah, dude. I was. I mean, I'd say I wasn't a particularly strong writer at that time. I think I fell into doing a decent job writing, but I didn't really have to write papers in high school. I didn't have to do a lot. I guess I was just, I don't know. I'm not trying to act like I'm a genius because I'm absolutely not. And as we get into what, I don't know, who I am, what I do, and how successful I am, quote unquote, we'll realize that that's definitely not the case. But I was so relieved when I got to college and was like, this is fine. These kids, I wasn't blowing anyone out of the water. My professors weren't like, this guy, we like this guy. I was just a kid and I made it. And I was happy about that.
Getting through.
But
so tell me a little bit about like your family. Like who are they? What are they like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I got 3 siblings. I'm kind of in the middle, if you can be in the middle of 4, but I'm the second oldest, I guess. But anyway, it's so hard to talk about my family without just making an entire episode about what my family's like.
We'll make lots of those.
I know it's tough to even really get into it, but I think what's notable about them is, and I'm sure there's going to be some similarities to yours. We don't know each other. For the people listening, we don't know each other's. We are each other's families. We were college friends that kind of fell out of touch for a while, and then kind of, I don't know, somehow got back in touch. I think it was like when you came out to my neck of the woods for something work related, and we kind of just got together when you were out here, and we've been staying in touch ever since. But we, a lot of what we'll learn about each other's lives is going to be, it's new to us too. So that's kind of fun. But for my family, like everything, there was just like that extreme emphasis on being Christian, that being set apart, living for the Lord. Like that's why I was homeschooled. My parents were very adamant about giving us a good Christian education. And their understanding of that was, under absolutely no condition would a public school teach me or my siblings about sex. Sex education from a public school was absolutely off the table, because they would teach you things like safe sex, while Christian parents of our particular brand were very much all about.
They said God's wedding gift.
Yeah, exactly. It was just there was very few things that were like instilled into you, whether with words or without, that made you realize that one of the worst things I could ever do is have sex before I'm married. So that was a part of it. English, there's a lot of books that, they wanted me to read books that maybe were written from Christians. I didn't read the classics like a lot of kids. I don't really recall a lot of the books that I read in high school. Maybe I didn't really read them. Maybe I read about them.
I'm with you there.
I'd be hard pressed to tell you what my English courses were in high school. It doesn't come to me at all. But history needed to come from a Christian perspective, because this is, we're God's chosen. We're the runner-up to God's chosen people. We're America, not Jews. Those are God's chosen people. It's not the same, but it's close. And
Hashtag I stand with Israel.
yes. Oh yeah. A lot of I stand with Israel stuff. But I feel like that'll drift us into politics, and we can stay at that for now. And then science. Science was like probably the biggest. I think for Christian parents that have been told that the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old and that God created people or created the universe in 6 literal days and then set the thing in motion for everything to just go and have the appearance of old age is that mattered. Like that's something that's particularly foundational to the brand of Christianity I grew up in, because they'll read the Bible and that's what they read in the book of Genesis. And they say, if that's wrong, then the entire Bible's garbage and nothing matters. And we should all just kill ourselves in a mass suicide is kind of the direction that they go in.
Yeah. I can't wait to get into that talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good subject.
So,
because that's like pulling the bottom brick out of my faith.
Yeah. So I feel like there's more to get into with my family than just the things that they thought about why they made the decisions they did, but it's hard to even know where else to begin. Like that was, all of this stuff was so foundational. I mean, cause I had spent a lot of time arguing with my mom about wanting to go to a public high school, or not even a public high school. I actually really wanted to go to a trade school when I was in high school and do like carpentry or something, because I didn't feel inclined towards academics or college. And I thought maybe I could get in the trade. And then, my mom was adamant that I did not go to school. She thought homeschooling was best for me. And I don't know. So and it's also funny because I felt like this is mostly my mom's type of decisions. Like I know my dad must have been active in it, but my dad was just he owned his own business. My dad's a dental technician, which means he makes false teeth, and his job is really cool. He tried to get us into the trade and we didn't want anything to do with it. It's actually a dying industry in the way that he does it. It's kind of being taken over by, 3D printers and automation, but he spent a lot of time working. He worked a lot when I was a kid, and he worked a lot and he made okay money, and it allowed for my mom to not have to work. So she was allowed to stay home and homeschool us, because that was, again, very important to them.
Stay home and protect her cubs.
Yeah. Now, something I'd like to get into at some point is the irony of my mom referring to her homeschooling us as a sacrifice, because they made so many sacrifices so they could afford to homeschool us. And I'm like, maybe you should learn the word privilege, because there's a lot of people who would find it a privilege to only have one person in the family work, particularly if you're a millennial and younger. But I don't know. What about your family, man?
My family, I think I grew up in a pretty extreme sect of Christianity, and my parents were they were like moderates in an extreme environment. I feel like,
yeah,
like they subscribe to some of those extremes, but just not in the way that the people at my school and some of the people at my church did. It was kind of an isolationist community. It was like, we protect our kids by keeping them away from everybody else, which I think that's probably a common theme in a lot of people's upbringing.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, even we having kids, I'm like, I got 2. We'll probably get into each other's lives a bit more, but it's something I understand. Like as you get older and have kids, you're like, I understand the need to protect your kids from things. The irony is now I feel the need to protect my kids from the things that maybe my parents think. And I'm trying not to take an extremist stance on that, like at this point, but
I can't imagine the balancing act that's got to be. My, my parents were like, they just really wanted the best for us. You know, they wanted to keep us away from things that they thought were scary
Yeah.
or that might, negatively affect us. We started out in a Southern Baptist church, which was really, very conservative, men in sport coats, women in dresses, a lot of it.
Okay.
That sort of an environment. The school that I went to and the community associated with that was also sort of that way. It was like, our kids don't date. All of our kids need to go to private school. They all need to get a Christian education.
Yeah.
Um, really shouldn't listen to any music that's non-Christian.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one.
Got to vet all of movies to make sure that there's not, a boob in there somewhere.
Did you know people who had that software? I think you bought like a DVD player, and it would censor out swear words and stuff.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody that I knew had one, but I do remember that.
I had a friend who whose parents got that for them. And the only time they were ever allowed to watch movies was when it was like through that thing. And I was my family I thought was strict. And then when I experienced that, I was like, what? That's the thing? Like,
yeah,
I still know these kids. One of them would probably be a fantastic guest too. Yeah, we got to hear about like his dad was a pastor, and that was a pretty strict environment, and that would be an interesting conversation to have. I haven't really had a conversation with someone like that in a long time.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the people at my school and stuff, the parents from there were a lot more conservative and strict. And my parents, like I said, kind of like your dad, like my dad, he was running a business. He was working out in these, car dealerships and independent garages and things. Like there was no way to shut yourself off from the world in that environment, and so I think they kept a foot grounded in reality throughout all of that, those years. And
yeah, that makes sense. My dad being self-employed, like he worked by himself, and he did work with these two other guys for a little while. And I remember him being like, they're so worldly and that it's hard. And then he was by himself. And so I'm like, that was another aspect of life that was insulated, I suppose. I didn't actually consider that as a factor in their development within church culture, is also simultaneously being removed from actual culture.
Yeah, if you have to go out and work with, lots of different people all the time and really interact with them, you just can't be completely sheltered from the real world.
Right.
And I think that environment, especially in that time period, that was kind of the goal for a lot of people with their kids, was just keep them, ignorant and away from the real world. And, if you're diligent enough and you filter out all the movies and you don't let them hang out with those grubby public school kids, maybe they'll never hear a swear word their entire life.
And then they won't say them because what happens if you say them? You instantly die and go to hell. So it's dangerous. Right. It's scary shit.
You have to, say the salvation prayer in order to rethink your salvation.
Thinking back on like the amount of protection that went on from you hearing the F word, you're like, I'm like, because there was the belief of like, well, you probably heard the same saying, garbage in, garbage out. Like if you hear this all the time, you're going to start talking like that and being like that, as opposed to like watching a PG-13 movie where some person says shit once. It's going to be like, that's the garbage. Now you're going to say it. And it's like, what poor understanding of people do you have to get like that stuck on something so simple? I don't know. It's just strange.
But instead, you're really just building up the taboo appeal of a lot of those things that you're protecting people from, especially with teenagers, But
Yeah. Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I don't know. That was kind of the environment that I grew up in. And then, eventually that becomes your comfort zone. And
Yeah.
that's really, why my first year of college kind of crashed and burned is because I was out of that comfort zone and I desperately wanted to be back in it.
Yeah.
And so,
So
I
that your
transferred out to Liberty.
your first college, I don't think you specified it was not a Christian college.
No, it was just a very small secular college in the middle of
I actually assumed it was you went from a small like high school, Christian high school. I assumed a college that was defined as particularly small. It made me actually think that must have been Christian.
1,200 kids seemed mind blowing to me. Like
Oh
that
my
was
God, I
a lot
bet.
of people on campus.
Wow.
So I know there's like no way to separate Christianity from any of your origin story here. But like, how were you introduced to Christianity, and like when did you quote unquote get saved?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't remember not being quote unquote saved. No, that's actually a super early memory because the first house that I lived in was like this tiny little like duplex, and I I think we moved from there when I was 5, and I have a memory of my dad. Me and my older brother had bunk beds, and we shared. Yeah, obviously we shared a room. But anyway, my dad was. I remember him doing that. Like, do you guys want to pray to be saved? Like, accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. Accept Him into your heart, and because if you don't, like, the alternative is like you go to hell. So it's like important that you do that. And I remember that and being like, okay. And I remember my dad praying and us repeating after him. And that was it. I got saved then, I guess. But outside of that, I mean, there was no part of my life that wasn't so interwoven with Christianity that I ever really questioned it. I always considered myself one of like the true believers, if you will. And I was always bothered by or affected by people who, probably threatened by, in all honesty, people who weren't buying in the way that I did or didn't understand it the way I did. Um, I it it was a really big part of my life. It was really important to me. I loved it. I loved it. I read the Bible. I wanted to learn about Jesus and theology. I wanted to learn the answers. I think I was interested in getting the answers to the difficult questions in life. And, when you don't really understand much as a teenager, you're like, what about this or what about that? And then when you have someone twice your age on the other side being like, the Bible has an answer for that. The Bible has an answer for that. Like, and then growing up in this set 'em up and knock 'em down culture was, it reinforced that. So like one of the things I remember in school, and it's like one of the few books that I really remember, which I would be interested to read again. It was called "Don't Check Your Brain at the Door," and it was basically just a giant shit on evolution. It was like, if like checking your like, oh, don't like, if you're gonna buy into this, it's because you just like gave up and checked your brain at the door, you big dumb fucking idiot. And I remember reading that book and being like, I know so many people I need to give this to. And excuse me, I was like, that was one of my favorite books. I'm like, because, and then what I mean by the set them up and knock them down culture is that book just strawmanned everything related to evolution. It was like, here's this, and then here's why it's wrong. And then evolutionists say this, and then here's why it's wrong. And then I gravitated towards books like, if you grew up in our culture, you know the name Lee Strobel. And it was like a case for Christ, case for a creator. Like, this guy wrote the book on apologetics for why it's absolutely 100% guaranteed certain Jesus rose from the dead, and that's why he's God, and then that's why you need to believe in this. Like, and his whole spiel was like, I grew up, I set out to prove Christianity wrong and then got saved and realized the truth of it. And
Okay, I
yeah,
know who this person
yeah.
is.
So I gravitated towards all that stuff. I wanted to, because I believed that what I had grown up with was right, and but I also knew the stakes. But it also impacted me, like in a lot of ways. As a kid, I thought I did think about like how I could be more like Jesus, and what it meant to be a good person in the world, and what it meant to leave a positive impact on this world. And it that's what ended up bringing me to Liberty. In a lot of ways, was like I got a Bible. I went to Liberty and got a Bible degree, and I was like, I need this. I want to learn more about the Bible. I kind of wanted to just be a missionary. I thought like telling other people about this was like the end all be all, and I wanted to share the gospel with everyone that I could. And I kind of stayed that person throughout college too. I would find ways to fit it into conversations and argue with my Christian friends about the way they were living. If I thought they were living in sin, like it mattered to me. Like I really dove deep into it. And there were plenty of kids that I knew from youth group or whatever that were like, they just went and then they did their thing and they didn't really give a shit about it, but still were like, yeah, we're Christians. Probably because they thought the stakes were the same as I did and that they'd go to hell. But if they weren't, but it actually was more than that for me. We're going to probably talk a lot about the trauma that people get from growing up Christian. And while I have a lot of anger about certain things, I don't really have any trauma. I just loved it and cared about it. And it stuck with me. I don't think disillusionment in one way or another set in until probably my senior year of college at Liberty. But
And you graduated. What class did you graduate?
dude, you're seriously gonna make me do math right now. It wasn't actually. It didn't matter to me. It didn't matter to me what year I graduated because it took me a long time. Because I was only in school part-time online for a while. I didn't go to my graduation or anything. I worked at the school and that gave me free tuition, but only a certain amount of credits a semester. So
that's right. Okay.
So it took me so long to get through. I got my undergrad in probably the amount of time it took my wife to get her undergrad and master's. So I probably would have been, dude, I'm not counting backwards and making dead air right now.
But I was just trying to think like I thought you were a year younger than me. So you would have been a junior when I was a senior.
Okay. But, yeah, I am, but I definitely was in college longer. It took, I think it was like, I probably finished 10 years. Like it was probably 2012 or something.
It's funny because I always got the impression with you that like you were legitimate.
You weren't one of the wanted, man. You made 23-year-old me, 22-year-old me the happiest motherfucker on the planet right now when you just said that. I would have jizzed in my pants hearing that. Be like, I got what I came for, and then that would have been it.
Wow. Yeah. I think for me, so if I was to trace it back, I think I said the magic prayer when I was like 6.
Yeah.
I went forward at a big altar call. So our Southern Baptist Church in Georgia did big altar calls. Every time they got together, there was an altar call. They always made an opportunity to come to the front and make big life decisions in a very emotional state. So that was when I got saved. And
the first time.
Right. I think I really wanted to have the relationship with it that you did. I really felt guilty that I just never felt like an emotional connection to it. Like a lot of the people around me did through high school, junior high, college, even, it seemed like everybody around me was just tapped into some sort of vibe that I wasn't getting. And I felt really guilty about it and I felt ashamed. And so I always tried to get there, I just never felt comfortable with it the way that a lot of the people around me did.
Mm-hmm. That story, I think that's not an unusual story either. I think what we grew up in has a way of making people feel like they need to go through the motions like everyone else to be able to tap into it like everyone else. Cause they're like, it looks great from this perspective. And it creates a lot of like shame. Like you saying you felt like guilty that you couldn't, dude, the amount of people who I've heard say the same thing, that they just couldn't, they felt so guilty that they couldn't tap into it like someone else that they saw or whatever. Like that's
like,
I mean, dude, that's so common. That's another one of those experiences, like just jumping back to what you said from the top of the episode of like you think that's a unique experience at the time. Like you're the only one in the room not feeling it. And like that, dude, it was probably so many other people.
Yeah. It's really built. The whole atmosphere is built on sort of an assumed consent to the whole thing, right? It's like, everything is structured in a way that makes you as an individual feel like you're the odd man out. Like if you're not getting in on this, if you're not, getting a lump in your throat and tearing up, or holding your hands in the air while you're singing songs, or, going up at summer camp and rededicating your life to Christ, like then there's something wrong with you because everybody else is. I mean, look around, everybody else is.
Yep.
And I think that era that I grew up in, because I mean, there has to be some distinctions between like the conservative Christian era that we grew up in versus 10 years before that. Because, it was so, I mean, you think about it, I was in junior high when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
And from that point forward, Christianity and political ideology really merged together. And that's a big topic that is, I'm glazing over for now for time's sake. But,
yeah, for sure.
A house where we were at church, 2/3 of the time when the doors were opened, and every night we had Fox News on at home, getting like the political side of that ideology. And so
right.
I think it kind of set me up in this situation where I was 100% convinced that all of it was real and true and legitimate without really believing in it.
It was just a fact. It was like something it was just a fact.
That's
in the way that like when you realize that like when you accept evolution as a fact, it just is. It doesn't have any impact on your life or your feelings or your thoughts. It's just like, this is how things are. And then but it doesn't change you. It's not doing something to your inner being or your soul. It's just something that exists is true.
Well, and to kind of like pivot to my education. So my school, like I said, was Christian curriculum. It was ACE, or Accelerated Christian Education, for any other Christian school nerds. It was completely 100% written from the standpoint of, we need to secure these children in the faith and the ideology and the worldview that we think is best. I'm sure everybody does that to some extent or another, Christian or otherwise. But, my science books
That's when peer-reviewed journals come in handy.
Right.
Christians don't really believe in peer-reviewed academic work.
Right. My science books taught that the Earth was like 6,000 years old.
Yeah.
And that when it was created, there was a giant water canopy in the atmosphere. And that dispersed the sun's sunlight evenly. And so the Earth was a tropical paradise. And that's the Garden of Eden. And that's why dinosaurs could live and thrive. And, people had all these different fruits and things like that to eat from. And then when Noah's flood happened, the water canopy fell and it flooded the Earth and killed all but, a handful of animals on a boat, which, I mean,
wow, dude, that's extreme. That's an extreme version of that.
Yeah, it was like taught from like it was dressed up in this like very scientific wrapping,
But dude, what's wild about that is like, if that's actually what it says. Like, it's not like they're coming up with like when in the book of Genesis they talk about the firmament, and it's just like there's like the separation of the waters in the sky and the water. Like, it's literally, there's like, you're surrounded by water, and that's what people, they thought they were in a dome surrounded by water.
You can't Hammond me right now.
I'm telling you that's what like ancient Near Eastern thought is that there was like a dome around you protecting you from the waters, and like when it rained, it's because holes got poked in it. Like, it was like, so then what you have is like that's what ancient Near Eastern people wrote down as a way to explain the world that they couldn't actually observe. And now you have people, grown adults who live in the 21st centuries, just repeating that and then trying to pretend like it's science. That's insane.
Yeah, like you use the scientific theories of cavemen to write your school curriculum. They did dismiss other scientific theories of cavemen, though. Like, I think a lot of those primitive cultures believe that the earth was created by some sort of deity jerking off.
Yeah, that wasn't an uncommon one.
Oddly enough, that's one that I buy into.
Yeah, perfect. So tell me about your faith now then. That's what you're into?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I don't like to put a name on my God, but yeah, pretty much that. So I all through high school and college, very much tried my best to adopt those beliefs, right? To not just know it as fact, but to really believe it. Like I said, a lot of guilt and shame over the fact that like I just wasn't feeling the magic out of all of it.
Yeah.
And really once I left college, I fell out of touch with a lot of the people who were, my closest friends for years. I mean, everybody just kind of moves on and has separate lives. And even the people that were in Michigan when I moved back, they're doing their own things now. It's just how it goes, right? But I think where it really started to fall apart for me was so my wife and I, I met my wife at Liberty. April and I got married like right after college, and we were somewhat dedicated to the idea of finding a church and really just immersing ourselves back into Christianity, right? We both felt guilty that we weren't going to church and that we, felt like we were slipping away from the core tenets of those things. Mm-hmm. But we tried like several different churches, and none of it clicked. You know, like you go to a church as a visitor, and the first like 3 weeks, everybody is up in your face and, hey, how are you doing? Oh, it's so nice to see you here. Great to have you out for some fellowship, brother. Using all the church language. And there's some point at like the 4 to 6 week mark where you're no longer a new person. Like you're there now. And so they get you into a small group or something, but people kind of drop the friendly, the overly friendly, outgoing facade, and they sort of settle back into routine. And just every group that we tried to go to or church that we tried to go, it just seemed so like just superficial and phony, and just all these people just seemed like they had no interest in who you were as a person. It was just like, I'm doing my duty. I'm being nice to the new people.
They probably have some weird like outlet on Reddit where they just get to be a shitty person too, like between the hours of like 11 and 1 a.m.
Every time they talk to a retail employee or a waiter. So it just never really clicked. And then what did click was I ended up, we'll talk about music, I'm sure, at some point, but I was in a band all through college, and that was like my identity at the time.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to get back into it. And I answered an ad on Craigslist for a band looking for a singer. And the dudes that I met up with, we just became great friends, and they were awesome. They were just great guys. I still talk to them, pretty regularly.
Man, that's so fun.
We never ended up playing any music, but we did build motorcycles, and we got to know each other that way. And these guys were not, other than one of them, like they were not religious, no connection to Christianity. And they were like, I feel like some of the first people to treat me in a way that made me feel like these people care about me past the point of like what I can do for them.
Yeah. Or and care about you whether or not you agree with them or think the same way they do.
Yeah. Not like passing judgment on your lifestyle or the way you talk or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And they were the first people, like, especially my buddy Ian. I just remember some times when he challenged some things that I said as if they were 100 absolute fact, you know, religious or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I remember at one point we were talking about drugs, not to just totally derail this or whatever, but we were talking about drug related crime. And I made this comment that, like, well, you know, what they need to do is just put stricter penalties on all this stuff so people understand that, like, you know, this, you're gambling with your life and your freedom if you decide you're going to take drugs or sell drugs. And he just like blew me out of the water with, you know, how stupid that mentality was and how, you know, like they just challenged me on a lot of things. And
Yeah.
at the time I was listening to a lot of talk radio, like Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity and stuff. And I started really asking questions about it for the first time. And it took a long time because of the guilt. But I finally like came to grips with the fact that, like, I have no connection to this other than the fact that I feel really guilty even thinking about letting it go.
Yeah. That's like some of the hardest parts for people. It's just,
yeah, it took like the migration away from Christianity took me years, you know. I'd say a good 5 years before I really got to a point where I was like, you know what? I am done with this and I don't feel bad saying it. And like, it's not something you know, I don't feel like I want to be an angry atheist or anything like that. But I can confidently say that this is not for me anymore. And so that's where I'm at. I mean, I don't call myself a Christian. I'm not an atheist. I kind of describe myself as like an apathetic agnostic.
Yeah. Do your parents know? Did you tell your mom yet?
My parents have done a really good job of just avoiding the subject. I think they know, but they don't want to hear it outright. So they've just sort of dodged the subject for a decade.
God, I would sacrifice a baby goat for my parents to dodge the subject.
Yeah, it's hard because it's like, you know, it's just they just want the best for you, right? They want to feel like you're heading in a good direction, and that's their worldview. You know, they've invested a lot in that worldview, and it means a lot to them.
Yeah, they spent so much time. Like, I mean, my parents spent 18 years trying to be like, this is it. This is what's right. This is what's right. And then for me to be like, I don't know. Like, I feel like that must suck for them. But my parents, I feel like my dad doesn't really get into stuff. He might make it like, I don't know, try to bait me into like a political conversation here or there.
Yeah, except for on Facebook, right?
Yeah, God, I'm really good at dodging them in person, or responding appropriately in a way that's just kind of like benign. Like, I don't know. I probably actually just make weird noises when he says stuff like, yeah, like that. It's stupid. But my mom will definitely say things like, she'll say Christian things to see. It feels like to see how I respond. Like, it does feel like I'm being baited a bit, and then I'd probably do the same thing there. But I think that I guess I think is going to be a fun dynamic, or not a fun dynamic. I don't know. No one's going to care. But so I actually still surprisingly and I feel like it's going to take a long time for me to get to a point where I can explain it or feel like anyone's understanding what I'm saying. But I still identify with Christianity in some loose form and fashion. I think the term post-Christian is a better descriptor of me, because I just don't care if other people are. If it's not for you, like if it didn't work for you, like what's anyone going to say that's going to fix that? Like nothing. Like you spent your entire life in it. And someone's supposed to be like, wait a second, but did anybody tell you that? And then fill in the blank. Like, it's so dumb. But there was a huge amount of disillusionment in my senior year of college where I just started like waking up and realizing that like, if you can write volumes in library, like you can fill a library with what people have written to defend why everything in the Bible makes sense and doesn't contradict itself. Like if you're writing an entire book about why half a dozen verses actually do make sense together, like you're spending way too much time trying to prove something that clearly is just not there. Like, and I started seeing that. I think the first part of my disillusionment in my evangelicalism was meeting people who weren't like me, politically speaking. I met I don't know. I met a lot of different people who thought a lot of different things. And when I was, when they came at me or challenged me on some of the things that I thought, I was just like, wait, that's a really good point. And no one's ever made that point before because I've never hung out with anybody who thought differently. And when you started getting challenged, it was like, wait a second.
And I think it's funny how there is like a self-aware component to like the isolationist streak in conservative Christianity, because I think it's with good intentions, but they are aware of the fact that like if you hang out with people that don't think like this, you're going to start to realize how ridiculous some of it is.
Yeah, it really hits you it's like it slaps you in the face pretty hard after a little while. And I don't know, it took me a long time to get to this point, but just to not spend any more time on it because it'll come out as time goes on. We should wrap this up, but I consider myself a bit of a postmodernist, which doesn't typically align with religious ideologies, but I don't really make a lot of truth claims. I've found a way to make what I have grew up with end up working. I find myself compelled or intrigued by the character of Jesus and the way that he functioned and the systems he challenged. When you're growing up Christian, everything about Jesus is all about Jesus told us everything we need to know about what it is to live a life like him so that way we can go to heaven. And, I think what made me feel interested in staying in this was when I look at it, all I saw was a guy telling the religious structures of the day that their exclusion was really problematic, and that any system that excludes somebody or considers somebody lesser than, or any empire that takes advantage of people for the sake of power. Like I started paying attention to that message and thinking this is neat and meaningful to me. And I don't know. So I stuck with it, I guess. I've drifted away from the idea that I have to believe in Jesus to be saved. I don't, that word makes me cringe. I don't really even know that anything happens when you die. To me, what's funny, and for me, compared to what I guess would be a lot of Christians, is believing in it, in the message and the purpose, has literally nothing to do with what happens when I die. And for most people who are Christian or grew up Christian, there's an emphasis on escapism, which is like, this world's awful, but Jesus is coming for us and we're going to live in paradise. And it's just waiting to get to the next life. And I am more than happy believing that nothing happens after this. Like this matters to me, even with kind of thinking that we all just take a dirt nap at the end of our last breath.
It's funny because for you, it's almost like more of a philosophy than a religion.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a good point. I would argue that it is. It's a way to be in the world. It's not anything. It's not like a series of propositions to assent to. There's no ascending to proposition. It's just, it's a way to be and to live and to function with your fellow humans.
think what's the other thing that's kind of funny is like, you still consider yourself a Christian, and yet you're pretty liberal as a whole, right? And I've washed my hands of it completely, and I'm probably a little more conservative leaning than you are.
Yeah, probably.
That's
But
the dichotomy.
And it is funny because a lot of people hearing the way that I would explain it would be like, "Oh, I mean, but you're not though. Like you're not that. You're not one of us." And I'm like, "I know I'm not one of you." Like, I mean, I still participate in a church, and I'm likely to not find another one if this one disappears because I'm allowed to be this there. There's no, the person you're going to hear and see on this podcast is the person that, the people hear and see at the church that I would go to on a Sunday if there wasn't a pandemic happening. But I don't know. And there's a lot that bothers me about some people there. Like I get irked by anyone who resembles what I came from, and I have to resist. Like, so I had that evangelical mentality that I had when I was in my early 20s that wanted to tell everybody they were wrong and convince them to think like me and be like me. I have to resist that urge because that hasn't gone away. It's like the team's changed a bit, but I'm like, when I find myself wanting to do that to other people, I think of that I'm just like I was in my 20s. And if I can't move on, if I can't grow from there and learn to be in a room with people who don't think like me and act like me, then I don't know. Then to me, then even pretending to participate in this is pointless because I think that's also part of what this is. So I don't know.
I think it's, like, I don't, it took me a while to not be angry at Christianity as a whole, especially those conservative segments of it. And I say that as if I'm not anymore. I still have a hard time with that at times.
Same.
But I don't hate Christianity. Like I said, right. I'm not the angry Reddit atheist, with the fedora and right. typing angry messages about why the Bible should be in the fiction section or anything.
Dude, I'm on Reddit atheism, and it's not atheism. It's literally just fuck Christians. Like that's all Reddit atheism is. It's really like get over it.
It's like an angsty 16-year-old.
It's rough, man.
I think where it's left me is not in that I'm not an atheist that's just hates religion and wants to, dump on it left and right. I think it's just made me very suspicious of ideology as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great. I love that.
I really don't like the idea that somebody's like the if you view the world through this lens, everything makes sense. It answers all questions. And there's nothing that can't be solved by just going back to a purer form of this right here.
Yeah.
I don't like it. And I don't like it in religion. I don't like it in political philosophy.
Yep.
I don't think anybody's got the answers to everything. And
that
when people start explaining things that way, that's where I start to really tune them out.
Dude, I'm 100% with you. That belief set permeates everything. But I think that's why religion's appealing to people, because I think in a lot of ways, the same people who are attracted to religion for the offer of certainty, even if you're not religious, you're offered that in other places, and people gravitate towards it and double down on it. And like,
yes, as you were setting that up, I was trying to remember the word that you used for it. It's like an addiction to certainty.
Right. You just look, life's too complicated for me to have to learn about every aspect of everything. I just need someone to tell me the truth. And that's what so many people are looking for. I don't not drift towards that from time to time. I have people that I look to for answers, but those people more and more are giving me questions and not answers. Like, I think that's when you move to, we could go on this forever. But what we were handed was a certainty. We were handed certainty as children, and that feels good when you're a kid. And you either just live with cognitive dissonance as an adult and stick with it and say, I don't need to think about that. I'll just believe this. Everything works. I'm good. Keep your head down. Or you just embrace, like, that's the other fun thing about considering or associating with Christianity is I have no sense of certainty in anything. But that's not something that often gets coupled with Christianity. And it's definitely something that I've received flack for from certain people at times in my life, but I don't know. I'm fine with it. And if someone goes, look, man, you're just not a Christian, I go, that's fine. Because I don't need you to think I am. I don't really like the word. It's not particularly helpful in today's society, but I don't really know what else to use. It comes with a lot of explaining. But if someone tells me that they don't think I am, like if I told someone, I don't think you're a Christian, they'd be like, oh, because that means they're like, what happens after that is dangerous and scary. But if someone's like, I don't think you're a Christian, I'm like, so what? Like, well, that means you're going to hell. I'm like, no, well, I'm not worried. That's fine. Like, I don't need you to think I am. It just doesn't matter to me anymore. This is just a way that I've found to be in the world that provide that I guess gives me peace and comfort with knowing that I don't know most things.
And I think that's a good theme to end this on. You know,
Yeah.
our goal with this podcast is not to point out all the flaws in religious ideology or to say, you know, to belittle people for their beliefs. Our goal here is really just to talk about some of the things that had a big impact on us and hear from other people that, you know, about the impacts it's had on them.
I mean, make no mistake, we're going to challenge it and shit on it and joke on it from plenty.
Right. We're going to have some fun with some of the sillier aspects of it. Yeah. But, you know, if you still are, you know, an active part of those communities, by no means do we want you to feel like this is a hostile environment for you.
Yeah.
We just want to talk about some of those things because it's taken us so long to sort of weed through the, you know, the talking points on some of this stuff to find what our actual stance on some of these issues is. And some of them we don't have one. You know, it's just there is no certainty in a lot of these things. But yeah, I hope that gives you kind of a background on who we are and a direction for where we want this show to go. We've got a couple of episodes kind of in the hopper already where we're going to talk about some funny and alarming and traumatic topics like purity culture and, you know, the cool intertwining of
Christian movies, fun Christian movies.
Oh, yeah. That's, if there's any part of this I'm looking forward to the most, it's like dissecting some of these excellent Christian movies that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah. I mean, Christianity, we all know is a huge subculture, and we intend to leave no stone left unturned.
You want a story that echoes, you know, the human experience through the ages. Here's a synopsis, okay? Islamic terrorists invent a time machine so they can go back in time and kill Jesus.
Ooh.
To prevent Christianity. This is a real movie that Sam informed me of, and I'm so excited to watch it. So,
well, all right.
Anyways,
man. What do you say we call it here and wrap up this first episode?
Yeah, sounds good. All right, thanks for listening, everyone.
See ya.